Hook, the morning. I almost lost my dignity on my own driveway. A cop walked up to me like I was the intruder in my own life. And that first question he spat out told me everything I needed to know. "What are you doing here, man?" Yeah, that happened and it changed everything. Act 1. Set up the ordinary life that wasn't safe. My name is Marcus Reed. I served 20 years in federal law enforcement. I paid my mortgage on time. I mowed a lawn that got more compliments than my haircut, and I wore suits that made people assume I was on my way to court or the opera, depending on the town. On the morning I'm talking about, I was standing in my own driveway, coffee and hand keys in my pocket shoes on the concrete I'd swept twice that week. Nothing dramatic, just a man about to get in a car and go to work. Simple, right? Then, Officer Blake showed up walking like he owned the street. His jaw set, his voice like gravel. "You don't belong here. Hands where I can see them." He grabbed my wrist, yanked my wallet, flipped through it like he was unearthing a confession, and when he found my federal ID, he smirked like he'd proven something. "That's fake, right? Where'd you steal that?" The arrogance was a physical thing heavy as the hand on my shoulder. I remember thinking, slow and precise, you could do anything right and still be judged wrong. My suit wrinkled against the hood of my car as he shoved me forward, and I told him, calm as I could, I live here. He laughed in a way that made the air colder. "Sure you do." That laugh right there is a sound I won't forget. It carries 1,000 assumptions. Act 2. Rising tension and the pivot. Neighbors gathered like it was a block party nobody invited me to. Phones came out. Mrs. Lane across the street started streaming. James from down the block crossed his arms and filmed someone shouted the HOA line about security. Officer Blake's partner. Officer Diaz showed up and asked for ID. I pulled out my keys slow so as not to escalate anything because I'd seen how quick emotion can turn a scene into a headline. Or worse. Blake took the keys, held them up like evidence, and said, "These could be copies cars get stolen." Everything in him screamed suspicion, not curiosity. I could feel my blood cool with a strategy I'd practiced on nights when I had to keep my composure in courtrooms and negotiations, when a wrong move would put lives and reputations at risk. I kept my hands visible. I answered questions plainly, and when my phone flashed the name Director Hayes, FBI, I made the choice to keep the call from turning the moment into a melodrama. I declined once, twice, because escalation isn't dignity. Then Blake took the bait. He grabbed my phone, put on an act for the crowd, and pretended to call someone important with a mocking voice. "Yeah, this your boy. We're taking him downtown." And for a second it looked like a stupid play, until the voice on the line said, "This is Director Hayes, release Agent Reed immediately." The air changed. Blake's face went white, but not from embarrassment. From real fear, like he'd swallowed a cold truth. I watched him as everything flipped. The tiny eagle pin on my lapel, the one you wouldn't notice unless you knew where to look, caught the light. For years I'd worn that pin to remind myself who I was on the days I felt invisible. That morning, it became more than metal. It was proof. When Director Hayes and her team rolled down the street, black SUVs like punctuation marks, everyone got quiet. Hayes stepped out professional precise, and the crowd that had come to gawk became an audience at a trial without a judge. She looked at Blake and asked the one thing he never anticipated hearing, "How many complaints about you have there been in the past year?" That was the pivot. The scene on my driveway turned into an investigation in real time. What Blake thought was a power move, stopping someone who didn't belong, became evidence of a pattern. Hayes read off complaint states the kinds of language officers had used, and like a surgeon, she exposed an artery of problems in that department. This wasn't personal theater anymore. It was Project Echo, a long-term operation designed to collect the kind of proof that can't be shouted away. Act 3. Consequences. Transformation, and a question that won't die. And then the consequences came in waves. Chief Langley, who'd signed the department up for a voluntary review months earlier to avoid a bigger federal intervention, stood with his hands tied by the paperwork he'd agreed to. Irony tastes like pennies. The department had a choice: accept federal oversight with a realistic path to reform, or fight and risk full-blown takeover criminal referrals and a budget collapse that would leave the town scrambling. Blake's career didn't end with a fiery arrest or a viral takedown. It ended with accountability in daylight. He was suspended, ordered into hours and hours of bias training, assigned community service in neighborhoods he'd casually dismissed, and his actions were documented as case studies for nationwide training. Humiliation, yes, but the kind that changes policy if people are brave enough to learn. For me, the victory wasn't personal revenge. It was strategy. Documentation over drama. I didn't raise my voice. I recorded what I could. I let the evidence stack, and when the federal team arrived, we converted humiliation into data and data into policy. Project Echo didn't just free me that day. It forced a conversation about how quickly assumptions become authority and how often authority hides behind good intentions and safety. Months later, the numbers started to change. Complaints down, community trust-up training hours increased from a checkbox into practice. Blake showed up to coach youth basketball in a neighborhood he'd never bothered to visit, and he told a local paper, "Agent Reed changed my life." Maybe that was true. Maybe it felt like a trite line when you first hear it, but transformation is messy and slow, and it's real when people keep showing up. Still, the ending isn't neat, and it shouldn't be. We rewired a small corner of the system, but the question I leave you with is, is it ethical to design a sting that exposes bias by inducing the exact behavior you want to condemn? Project Echo walked that line. We used a controlled bait to reveal a pattern. Some will say entrapment, others will call it necessary. I call it strategic and dangerous if mishandled. Voice feeling and the small things that matter. What I want you to hear is this. The small moments were the loudest. The way Blake laughed when he proved me wrong, the shaky apologies from neighbors who realized they'd filmed their own complicity, the single phone light blinking a name that saved me. There were times I felt pure rage, times I wanted to fight, and times I felt unbearably alone. But I kept my voice calm because calm builds a bridge evidence can cross. Anger makes headlines, evidence makes law. I also want to say something to anyone listening who's ever been looked at as suspicious for the color of their skin, for the car they drive, the clothes they wear, or the neighborhood they choose to call home. You are not alone. Strategy is not surrender. Documenting injustice doesn't make you less human. It makes you a witness, and witnesses change systems. Final scene and the open question for you. So here's how it ends. For now, my driveway is still swept. The HOA sent out a polite note about community standards. The FBI set up a small field office a few blocks over, and Project Echo became a blueprint people in other cities wanted to try. Some people cheered the tactic, others condemned it as manipulation. Both sides have valid fears. Fear of unchecked police power, fear of overreaching federal action. And that tension is where real conversation starts. Call to action. Speak up. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Project Echo was right? Is evidence that forces accountability worth playing a dangerous game to get it? Or does that cross a line we shouldn't cross? Tell your story in the comments. Have you been judged in your own neighborhood, stopped for no reason, or witnessed someone else being assumed guilty? Share what you did, how you kept your calm, or how you wish you'd acted. If you want practical tips, I'll put resources in the description on how to document safely and your rights during police encounters. If this story landed with you, subscribe for more real-life accounts where strategy met stubbornness, where patience sometimes defeats prejudice, and where ordinary people learned to use what they had, a phone, a badge, a voice, to change a system. Hit like if you believe evidence matters more than outrage, and share this with someone who needs to see that small acts of documentation can ripple into big policy. Remember, justice sometimes comes slow and rarely clean, but it comes when we decide to turn our moments of hurt into tools for change. What would you have done in my place?